And I've got a new special guest here, John Crowley, who is President and CEO of the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. John, thank you so much. Great to be with you.
You betcha.
We've been hanging out a lot lately.
We've had a lot of dinners.
I had a lot of dinners together with you, which is, one of the...
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's one of the struggles, though. There's a lot of good food, a lot of rich food. I need to eat more celery and stuff.
We have medicine for that. That's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. I want you all to know that, in my view, John Crowley is one of the biotechnology industry's heroes. You've been at this now. Bio has been at this for 50 years, so congratulations on that anniversary. So 1/5 the length of the United States. It's pretty good, 20%. Of the period of the United States, so this is amazing. But I'm interested in you sharing, if you're willing to, how you got into this and how you became an entrepreneur, head of the bio industry, and why it's so personally important to see bold bets become the norm.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Steve, and thank you for playing that video from the association. So you mentioned our industry is 50 years old, and it started back in April of 1976 when a young venture capitalist, Herb Boyer, walked into the office of Bob Swanson walked into Herb Boyer's office, a UC San Francisco professor, read his papers about genetic engineering, protein cells, and said, boy, this is really interesting. We should think about forming a company around that. And that company, that idea that literally was written on a cocktail napkin, became Genentech. I knew nothing about science and medicine and biotechnology, and we entered into the world of science and medicine less than a quarter of a century after that first meeting. And it was when our daughter, Megan, who was 15 months old at the time, was diagnosed with a rare form of muscular dystrophy known as Pompe disease. And up till about a year of age, Megan was seemingly healthy. We just noticed she wasn't pulling up in the crib, taking her first steps. And so we went from pediatrician to neurologist, from blood test to deep muscle biopsy, and we got the results. And I remember asking the neurologist many years ago now, is it serious? He said, yes, it's very serious. She won't live to be a couple of years old. She'll get very, very sick very quickly. It affects the heart, skeletal muscle. And he looked down at our then 7-day-old son, Patrick, and said there's a 25% chance he also inherited both copies of the bad genes here. My wife and I, like all of us, are silent carriers for, any one of us for maybe a dozen or so on average genetic diseases, so no history in the family. And that set me off into the world of science and medicine. I think more than anything, Steve, desperate to find anybody who knew anything about that disease. And so I started knocking on doors, reading papers, and I had no idea what biotech was, how it was founded, how you fund and start companies, how medicines are developed. I didn't know what a clinical trial was. I just know we needed some measure of hope. And that's, in some ways, our journey is unique, and we were able to find scientists and take a home equity loan and start a little biotech company that became successful, that invented a medicine that saved, thankfully, our children's lives. And Megan will be 30 soon, and Patrick 29. But our journey is not all that unique in terms of the hopelessness.
It's an amazing
hopelessness
story.
That
it's an amazing story that you as a dad
we had an awful lot of help along the way. But it gets to the heart and soul of what is biotechnology. I remember my first day when I started that little company. It was based on science out of the University of Oklahoma, and not then a hotbed of biotechnology. And I didn't go to our labs that were just beginning. I went up to Boston to the Bio Convention, which ironically now I now oversee. And I remember Christopher Reeve, who had played Superman in the movies in the 70s and 80s, gave the keynote address, and he came out as a quadriplegic on a ventilator. And he said, biotechnology, that's just a great big word that means hope. Hope for him and those like him, and hope for those who don't know that they're going to need hope, yet to break their neck in an accident, yet to be diagnosed with an illness. And that really stuck with me. And again, you get to the medicines, where we are, we've got a phenomenal array of medicines that have extended and enhanced human life, saved human life, given people time with the people they love, quality of life, given we in the industry a chance to go back to the drawing board and do it again in that virtuous circle of innovation, everyone and everything that it takes to make newer and better medicines, right? The academic centers, the NIH, startup companies, small, mid-sized, large biotech and pharma companies. More than half of all medicines, some years more than 70% of medicines, originate the same way that we started. A scientist working in a university through his tech or her tech transfer office, spitting out a technology, finding funders. The vast majority of them don't succeed. They fail financially, the science is too difficult. But that's how we make medicines. That's a uniquely American model. So that video that you saw, we just rolled that campaign out about a month ago. Every word in that was chosen carefully. The setbacks, the toils, the entrepreneurship, American biotechnology.
And the risks.
All of that.
I mean, the risk-taking involved.
Enormous risks.
I've spent a lot, so I've known your organization for a long time, and I've gotten to know a lot of your members. And a lot of the coolest members are these very small, shops that have found something to move on.
Yes.
I love that. You've got the big companies as well, but the small companies are the ones I love. And I think what's interesting to me is it's very, very rich to look at the targets they have, the challenges they have, and how they've come together in bio to try to deal with the ecosystem out there. Some of it's policy, some of it's funding, some of it's, having, market power, aggregating with a lot of other people trying to do similar kinds of things. But I'm just interested in the years that you've been in this. Could you do easily today what you did back then? Or has it gotten harder and tougher?
In some ways, it's gotten easier. There's more capital available generally. There are more people who understand the industry, more people with the technical subject matter expertise. And in other ways, it's gotten much more difficult. And you look at why is it difficult? The science will always be tough. We've said in our industry that it is about risk-taking, pioneering, that we'd rather be the first to fail than the last to succeed. We will always hopefully have that spirit and mindset. But the challenges that we face now are largely man-made, both on the innovation side, right? How do we create these newer and better medicines, therapies, vaccines? How do we do it more cost-effectively? How do we do it faster? How do we do it to include more people broadly in our clinical trial systems? But then access as well. I know John was here, John Brooks recently, and he, Chris Klomp, others, deeply involved, Dr. Oz, in trying to work with us to figure out how do we make sure that nobody ever goes a day without their medicines. The group that I've run now for 2 years, it's the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. And we've always, I think, appropriately focused on that virtuous circle of innovation. More and more, though, we need to equally pay attention to access and identify where are the economic barriers and where are just the systemic barriers that have arisen that have made drug development so difficult and costly beyond the difficulties of science and medicine.
I don't know how to ask this question exactly, but I'm sort of interested as you kind of look at...
You know how to ask every question exactly.
The American biotech engine
Yeah.
and the solvency of it really interests me in how healthy it is or isn't. And I guess, as I was discussing with John Brooks, there are other global competitors out there. It's not just China. There's India. There's other players out there
Sure.
that want to be biopharmaceutical giants, and they're looking and learning from what people like you have done. Are we taking your industry for granted in America that it is in such a strong position that we don't have to worry about supporting it?
I don't think we are anymore. I think for a time we did. Either we took it for granted or it was just not understood. I do sense here in Washington, policymakers, lawmakers increasingly understand why we need to care about biotechnology. And we give 3 reasons. We start almost every meeting with this. You need to care about biotechnology for the public health, right? What we can do to extend and enhance human life, which we saw so acutely in COVID, of course. We need to care, secondly, as an engine of economic growth. If this is the century of biology, the jobs that already have been created, the economic output from our industry is enormous and can continue to be enormous. And thirdly, importantly, we need to care for our national security. The notion that a safe and healthy workplace and population is important for a nation's security and ultimately the world, but also as an instrument of power. And, if we think our adversaries exert global influence with infrastructure finance programs or, their Belt and Roads or other programs, imagine if China or others would control access to the world's most advanced and sophisticated medicines. The amount of global power and influence, both soft and hard, that you can exert would be enormous, arguably as great or greater than in the fields of AI or quantum or rare earth minerals. And specific to China, we can talk about what the challenge and threat is there, but it's an existential threat, and I don't say that lightly. When we look at and we have an example of this. Back in 1990, well more than half of all medicines were created in Europe. They had for decades, it was the heart of the pharmaceutical industry. Then Europe put in place, a lot of anti-business challenges broadly, but they also started to restrict access to medicine. With socialized medicine and the way that they distribute and value life there. And that, together with the rise of the entrepreneurship and science in the United States, shifted the balance where the United States became the dominant power in biotechnology. We are now, China, this is no surprise, in 2011 with, I think it was their maybe 12th five-year plan, for the first time articulated the biotechnology as a national security industry for China. And then over the last several plans, you've seen what they've done to direct resources in the second five-year plan. In 2016, they directed over that five-year period over $100 billion into the biotechnology industry. They changed the entire nature of their FDA, even changed the name of it, from one that had monitored and overseen the world of generic medicine to branded medicines. They started large contract manufacturing companies. They began to control all the nodes from low-margin businesses that we didn't have an interest in to now some of the most sophisticated biotechnology, biopharmaceuticals, and now standing up global commercial enterprises as well to get to access and distribution. This is an enormous threat. And our view, Steve, is that the world and everyone living in it, including in China, the world is a better, safer, healthier, and more prosperous place when the United States, together with our allies, leads in biotechnology.
Listen, I just want to tell all of you that are standing that I love you more than anyone else. But there are chairs up here, so if you want to come grab a chair, you're not being rude. Just go get a chair if you want to sit down. Just moment you do that. So
we have room on the couch.
John will not mind us. But look, I want to ask you another question. Complicated question here. Because I got Sudip Parikh coming up next, and he is a great guy, and he is he's kind of like the Joan of Arc of science right now. Out there, kind of hitting hard, and he's worried a little bit about erosion of a lot of the patterns, the support, the investment in science. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Are you worried about the science ecosystem? That's different than the biotech engine, but part of it is all of those other pieces, the people, the universities, the National Science Foundation grants, that kind of science ecosystem. I didn't push John Woods on it because he asserted that we're bringing some of the best brains in the world here. But some of the best brains in the world are going to Europe and going to Canada and going to New Zealand and Australia and even to China rather than the United States. Now, are you worried about that being something that's a blind spot that we need to think about?
I think it is. I think it's losing the big picture. When we talk about our industry and what we do ultimately to create, develop, distribute medicines, the core, the foundation of that in the United States is our great academic research, the important role that the NIH plays. I'm all for modernizing, reforming the NIH, frankly, the FDA and other government agencies, and we're deeply engaged in that. But we need to realize that since World War II, we have had this philosophy and programs, and it started with Vannevar Bush, who oversaw this in World War II, public-private partnerships that led to ideas like radar and penicillin in World War II. And he issued a seminal paper on the frontiers of science after World War II, and said, we need the government to fund basic research, together with all the other sources.
And Vannevar Bush said politics ends at water's edge.
Among other great things, yes, exactly. So yes, I think it's very, very important as well. And let's think, every policy, every proposal, whether it's a tariff, a drug pricing model, whatever it may be, let's ask, does this maintain and advance our lead in this critically important industry of biotechnology, this uniquely American and American-born industry? And if it doesn't, what else can we be doing? And how can we do it with purpose, direction, and a great sense of urgency?
What I love about the video, but I also know from your life, and I've also admired Lilly for it, is that I sort of feel as an industry, the industry is shy talking about the risks it's taking, the failures it's had, how it's learned from those failures, the downside of the ledger. There's a resistance in your industry to doing that, but I sort of see it as the missing piece for the American public to understand that this is a joint thing that's not easy. It's not just a one-way street. I'm just interested in your thoughts on that and whether whether bio is transforming that or whether that might be a way to increase the trust of the American public in your industry.
Totally agree. The video that you saw is going to have many, many offshoots and themes, one of which is going to be failure. How do we fail? We hear that, the pancreatic cancer news coming from one of our companies, Revolution Medicines, that most people probably never heard of the company a year ago or a month ago,
right.
maybe. Remarkable, and part of a pipeline of just remarkable medical miracles. But the failures that they had along the way, you look at every successful biotech company today, they all had periods of time where clinical trials failed, markets weren't cooperating, stocks were down, they did 50, 70% layoffs. I went through it with our business over 20 years of running a biotechnology company. That's part of entrepreneurship, right? That's the overcoming adversity. So yes, we need to tell that story. More broadly, Steve, I think we've done a poor job at storytelling, at telling the story of what is this industry, how does it work, and why is it so important? And that's why we launched this campaign, to humanize it. Who we are, what we do, why we do it. And where there have been failures, to highlight those failures, the essential failures of risk and reward, but then also failures of accomplishing our mission. And I think a lot of those lie on the access side. So my big, bold idea bet is we've had, back in 2016, after years of bipartisan work, President Obama signed into law the 21st Century Cures Act that really advanced and invested in innovation. I think it's time for a 21st Century Access and Affordability Act. Let's take directly on out-of-pocket payments. When people talk about the price of medicines, that's what they talk about. What do they have to pay at the pharmacy counter? And they are increasingly frustrated with lack of access, where their doctor writes a prescription for a medicine, and it's like a recommendation to a doctor at an insurance company, you're lucky if you're a doctor, who's never seen the patient. So let's tackle those head on, and it's going to
Well, you put that campaign
investment
on it. I'm happy to moderate it.
We will absolutely,
Okay.
Stay tuned. So thank you. Thanks for listening.
Listen, thanks. John Crowley, President and CEO of the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. A real hero. Thank you, my friend.
you.
Thank
Take
you
care.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.